All right. So my name is Ashley Williamson, and I am the co-executive director of the Giving Grove National. So we are an organization that supports community orchard programs all across the United States. And we are based in Kansas City, Missouri. And now we have 15 different cities that are partners. So you'll see some of those different cities on today. And we have some of our program managers here online today too. So hello to everybody and welcome. Thank you for joining us for this workshop, Building a Diverse Orchard Space, Biodiverse Orchard Space. We have Matt Bunch, our horticulturist for our national organization here today. He's also the manager of the Kansas City Community Gardens Giving Grove program here in Kansas City, where we started. So Matt's going to take us through this presentation. And during this presentation, I'm going to be watching the chat. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat and I'll make sure that if they're timely, I can have him answer those questions right away. We will be collecting notes and resources. So if you have anything that is related to what Matt is talking about, please share that in the chat. I make sure I collect all that information and I'll send it out to anyone who registered or attended this workshop. If you're interested in learning more about the Giving Grove, you can visit us at www.givinggrove.org. We have some really good resources there for orchard management. So go ahead and check us out there. We also have a YouTube page where workshops like this will be stored. So I'll pass it over to Matt and he'll lead us through this workshop.
All right, thank you very much, Ashley, and yeah, welcome all. So yeah, this is a mix of program managers and folks that just want to find out a little bit more on creating a biodiverse urban orchard. So as Ashley mentioned, I'm not only with the national team, but also I am the program manager of the orchard program here in Kansas City, and we have installed over 260 of these. We call them mini orchards, micro orchards throughout the Kansas City metropolitan area. So needless to say, we have a little bit of experience. It's not all the experience in the world, but a little bit of experience on not only installing these, but also the kind of sites that we install them with. So with that, I'll start the presentation. I'm also going to turn off my camera because it's probably annoying you as it is annoying me. So if you do have any questions, yeah, just introduce them into the chat. And if it's something that Ashley can't quite answer right away, we can either interrupt the presentation if it's a really pressing question, or we could wait until the end and I could answer all the questions then. All right, so first off, really when we're looking at spaces, orchard spaces, there's kind of, well, there's a lot to consider, and really where to start? Where do we start? Because in some cases we may have the land, we may own the land, work with a nonprofit that owns some land and wants to do something with that land. So first off, we need to evaluate what that land is. And so with that, we're looking at a number of different attributes of that land. So we're looking at the parcel size. We're looking at sun exposure versus shade, some of the advantages and disadvantages thereof. We're looking at terrain and airflow. In some cases, the terrain may tell you that no, this is not a good place to plant. We're also looking at existing ground cover and vegetation. So what is already growing there? Does that mean that fruit trees might be able to grow there and other things? Also, we want to look at the human infrastructure all around. What does that tell us about the site, and how can that help us decide on a plan for an orchard in that site? Then we also want to look at soil composition and texture, because this is super important when we're talking about plant growth. And then we also want to understand what the site history is. In many of these urban areas, the site that you're dealing with is maybe the second, third, 15th iteration of what was on that site. So understanding a little bit of that site history can help inform you on what you're going to plant in the future. So first, kind of let's just tackle the parcel size, the lot size, if you will. Of course, the larger the lot, the more species and the more plants you can put on that lot. With a lot of the typical urban lots that we plant on, these are mostly city lots. These are housing lots. So we're talking 40 to 50 feet wide and maybe 100 to 120 feet deep. So really, you can't get a lot of species of trees. Well, you can get a lot of species of trees. They're just all smaller trees, sort of your more traditional fruit trees that would be growing about 15 to 20 foot wide. However, larger plants like some of our nut crops, like pecans, chestnuts, walnuts, those are going to be much larger trees. And so we will not plant those on some of these smaller residential lots. Shrubs and herbaceous perennials, yeah, that's certainly a no-brainer on a lot of these smaller lots, because they aren't going to get very large, and you can get a lot of different species in that lot size. And really, you need to know more about what the plant habit is in order to maximize that space in your orchard. And to that end, while mapping images are helpful, really being boots on the ground on that site is of utmost importance. Seeing that site, and especially if you're very familiar with that site, going through the growing seasons with that site and understanding what the vegetation is, where the weed pressure is, where things don't grow on that site. For program managers, doing a new site visit in the winter time is not going to be nearly as valuable as doing a site visit in the middle of the growing season. In the middle of the growing season, you get to see everything. It's a warts and all as such. All of the vegetation that is coming up on that lot, and where some of the maintenance challenges may lie ahead. So another thing that we always consider is sun access. And when you're talking about fruits, when you're talking about vegetables, when you're talking really about most of the edible crops that we grow, sun is going to drive that food production. So when we're talking fruits in particular, sun drives flower bud production and thusly drives fruit production. So the more sun that you have on a site, the more production that you potentially can get. So understanding that sunlight and getting at least 8 hours is going to be very important in this process. Now, some sunlight is going to be more beneficial than other sunlight. So let's think about first thing in the morning, and that morning sun, it comes up What does that morning sun do? It dries off the dew. Why is it important to dry off the dew? Because dew is a prime catalyst for fungal development. So when I'm talking fungal development, I'm not just talking foliar fungal development, but I'm also talking fungal development on fruits and even on vegetables for that matter. So having access to morning sun from the crack of dawn is very important. That can't be understated enough. So as you're walking your site, go out there first thing in the morning when the sun rises, and notice where the dew has formed and where the dew has not formed. So take that into account. Also realize that some plants may prefer the understory, and may like more dappled sunlight, and or protection from the hot afternoon sun. So you think about some of our native fruit crops like pawpaw and persimmon. You naturally will find persimmon along the edge of the woods, and pawpaw you will find in the deep woods along ravines and sometimes along creek banks. Now, with both of these crops, they aren't going to set huge amount of fruits in these shaded to semi-shaded areas. However, they are more adaptable to these shaded areas and still well set fruit in these shaded areas. It just won't be nearly as much if it were a full sun situation. And then there are things like currants and strawberries especially. The heat of the afternoon from about 2 o'clock onward, strawberries absolutely hate that in most parts of the country. Once we get up to about 90 degrees in full sun, that the plants really start to stress, and they really benefit from some sort of afternoon shade. The same can be said for currants too. Currants tend to get a lot of sunburn on their foliage as the afternoon hours go on. So having some of that afternoon shade can be very important. And a big tip here is when you're designing, design with taller plants going to the north. So when you think about an orchard and some sort of standard orchard plants, you have your berries, like let's say blueberries or raspberries. Those would be maybe to the furthest south. But then as you go further north, then you have apples, which will be in the 12-foot range. Then you would have European pears, Asian pears. Both of those would be in the 15 to 18-foot range. And then as you go further north, then maybe you get into some of your nut trees, which will be 35 to 50 feet tall. So think about the different heights and how that sun is coming across that landscape, and making sure that you're not shading out some of those crops that are really going to be prime fruit producers for you. So terrain. Terrain is huge when it comes to planning any of these sites. Like I mentioned earlier, if you have too steep of a slope, that can be very hard to work on, very hard to plant trees, and it might just be something that you either need to terrace or you just end up mowing or planting in some sort of ground cover. Now, gentle slopes are great for airflow. And why is that important? Well, airflow, and when you think about cold air and warm air, so warm air rises, cold air sinks. When you have that gentle slope, you get a mixing of those airs. So you don't have the cold air never really bottles up, and the hot air is able to move through. And so what that does is it creates that gentle breeze, that airflow, which helps mitigate things like dew and leaf wetness and any sort of fruit rots that could be happening. So having that gentle slope is really great for an orchard. It's not you're not always going to find a lot with with a gentle slope, but if you have one, that's great. The other thing about slopes is they can also shed water, and in some cases this can be a problem, especially when we get these 1.5 to 2 inch an hour rains. So that slope has shed the water, and then none of that water is able to actually soak in to help any of the surrounding plant materials. So if you do have some of these slopes, you may want to look at changing the grade a little bit of your site. And what this looks like oftentimes is digging out swales. Those swales can help capture the water, can help slow the water, or doing both berms and swales along that slope. These berms and swales help retain the water, slow the water. That water can then percolate into the soil and help some of the surrounding crops that you're growing. Another thing about slopes is north-facing slopes are always the last to heat up in the spring. Now, why is this important? Well, let's think about spring, and I know we're in all different parts of the country here, but it's one of those it's pretty much true all around the country, is as we go from winter into spring, that south-facing slope is going to warm up first. What happens there is the trees get tricked. The trees, they warm up, their buds start to break, those flowers open, and then let's say we get a frost or a hard freeze. Well, those are the first trees that will lose their fruit crop. Now, if you have trees that are on a north-facing slope, that north-facing slope is the last to heat up because it's not receiving that direct sunlight that the other slope has been receiving for the past 3 to 4 weeks. So these north-facing slope trees will then break their buds a little bit later, and therefore they maybe have broken their buds after that last frost or that last hard freeze. So another thing to think about the terrain is low spots create frost pockets. What do I mean by a frost pocket? Well, you've probably seen this maybe more on a macro scale, but as you drive through the hills in the morning, especially, you will see where the clouds have settled, where the dew has settled. That's also where the cold air settles. That's also where the frost settles. So in the case of an early spring, if you have these trees situated in a low bowl situation, they will be they will probably get hit by either that frost or that hard freeze. So avoiding planting in these frost pockets can ensure that you will get a harvest. Another thing about low spots is they may also hold water. So the photo here that's on the right, these are actually pecans that have been planted in a low swaled area on one of the larger sites that we've planted. We purposefully planted the pecans there because pecans are a bottomland tree, and they can handle that water inundation throughout the season. Now, long periods of time, especially during the growing season, no, they can't handle it, but they can handle this periodically, and they actually end up thriving in this kind of situation. But a lot of the fruit plants that we're dealing with, most of them don't like to be in standing water. So when you're looking at your site, make sure you're not planting in a bowl in a standing water situation where you have poor drainage. Another thing as you're evaluating the terrain is undulating terrain may be clues to buried debris. And what do I mean about that? You know, we're working with a lot of urban sites. In the Kansas City area, it used to be commonplace for when they would take down a house, they would pretty much, you know, they would leave a lot of the foundation, sometimes bulldoze a lot of the limestone and brick, kind of just cover it up with some soil here and there. And then over the years, you would get this settling, and you would get a lot of undulations in that area. So having extreme undulating terrain is probably a clue that you do have some sort of debris. Another clue is patchy ground cover. And if your site has a lot of dirt pockets, areas where there's really no growth of any sort of grass or weediness, or the plants that you have are maybe just annual weeds and not perennial weeds or perennial cover. This is a sign that you have fairly thin soils, and there could be some underlying debris, or it just could be some native limestone, some native rock, or gravel that's down there that is preventing lush green perennial growth.
Matt, a question about the terrain and the urbanite. If you do start digging at a site and you find that there is a lot, what are some actions you can take? Is there anything that you can do?
Yeah, so if you start finding that there is a lot, most of the time you will have noticed this maybe prior to even the planning stages of the orchard, because you will see the bare patches. Now, if the whole lot is kind of a bare patch, that can certainly be problematic. So are there some things that you can do? So sometimes it can be as simple as making field adjustments. What this means is you stray from your planting plan by moving the tree over 3 feet. We've had to do that in instances where we had measured out for the line of trees, and all along that line of trees, we were directly on an old limestone foundation. So we simply shifted our line of trees 3 feet over to the south, and we were fine. Now, if the whole site you are coming across this, and especially if you're starting to find things that are like more metallic or a lot of plastic, and maybe maybe construction debris, wood and plywood, you may want to reevaluate your site entirely. Now, if it's just let's say it's an old parking lot, for example, because in some cases that's just a matter of somebody had put 4 to 6 inches of gravel over existing soil and used it as this impervious surface for 5 to 10 years. In cases like that, sometimes you can get in and decompact that soil. Now, when I say decompact, that's not necessarily tilling the soil, but it's coming in with a subsoiler, which is basically a blade that can go down 2 to 3 feet and rip below that gravel and start exposing some of the soil that's down below that. Now, in that, that may not be all that needs to be done, because really, depending on the site, if the site has sort of a checkered environmental history, you may need to get some various testing done on the site, and you may need to dig into the site history a little bit more. So it can be complicated, or it can be as simple as just making field adjustments.
Thank you.
I guess another thing I might add to that, if you can also start piling organic material on top of the site and start building up soil on top of that site. So when I say organic material, I'm talking about compost, I'm talking about wood chips, especially fresh green wood chips, and allowing those fresh green wood chips to break down year in and year out. And then we're looking at more of a 2 to 3 year process before you really get to that planting stage. All right, so existing ground cover and vegetation. This is once again a very good reason to be looking at the site that you're planning on planting during the growing season. Because while, a few of us have pretty good plant identification skills in the dormant season, most of us will know a plant a lot better during the growing season, and you're able to identify things. So, the whole deal here is certain species may make it difficult to plant and manage a site. Or they may even be antagonistic to other plants, meaning they will negatively affect the growth habit of some of the species you're trying to get established. So for us here in Kansas City, especially, but I know in other parts of the country, these first two here are a real bad problem: Bermuda grass and Johnson grass. Bermuda grass is one that, I would say 30 or 40 years ago, we probably didn't have as many issues with, but now at, I would say probably 50% of our sites, we face some sort of Bermuda grass intrusion. And the reason why Bermuda grass is a problem is it's a perennial turf grass. It's the photo below, and it thrives in droughty soils. But then if you give them kind of this beautiful fluffy soil, all of a sudden it will just take off. And so anytime where we dig a hole in an area that has Bermuda grass and we've disturbed that soil, we add a little bit of compost, we add a little bit of mulch when we plant the trees. Oh my goodness, that Bermuda grass loves it. And then we'll start invading the space of that tree and ends up absorbing a lot of the moisture that comes either via rain or when we water the tree, and the nutrients. So Bermuda grass is a really big resource hog, and when we can, we try to mitigate Bermuda grass ahead of time. So we'll work with sites. We've tried recommending solarization of Bermuda grass, but that is a long-term solution and doesn't always work out well. Unfortunately, most of the time with Bermuda grass, we end up recommending that people bring out the big guns and they are applying herbicide to their site a few weeks ahead of a planting. So that's how we deal with Bermuda grass. Johnson grass is less of a problem with some of our, I would say, micro sites, some of our smaller sites, but in some of our larger sites, it can be more of a problem. Early on, when we started this orchard program, we were actually buying in a compost blend, a soil compost blend. And unbeknownst to us at the time, it ended up having Johnson grass seed in it. So a couple of years later, we're starting to notice Johnson grass come in around all of our trees. And that was very disappointing when we realized that happened. If so, I guess the lesson learned there is make sure you're getting your soil resources from somebody who has truly tested their product. The other thing here is as you're planning out a site, make sure you're looking for this. And if there is Johnson grass tucked away in a corner somewhere, make sure you're not planting any of your orchard plants near that Johnson grass until you have removed that Johnson grass from the area. Canada thistle's another problem. Not so much around here, but in other parts. And same deal, it's another resource hog. Walnuts. So a lot of sites have walnuts. And yes, walnuts, certainly are an edible crop. But walnuts also can cause problems with a lot of plants in the rose family. And many of the traditional fruit trees that we grow are in the rose family. So if you think of peaches, plums, apples, pears, they're all in the rose family. So if you plant some of those near the drip line or even within sort of the root zone of a walnut, you will get less than ideal growth. And in some cases, depending on the species, you may end up getting plant death by planting too close to a walnut. Ailanthus, also known as tree of heaven, it's another one of those sort of ubiquitous urban tree weeds. So it has allelopathic tendencies, meaning that it actually releases a toxin into the soil that benefits the plant itself, but ends up killing other plants around it. Japanese knotweed is a huge problem. It's a minor problem here in the Kansas City area, but it's become a larger problem, especially back east. Once again, same story. It's allelopathic and it grows incredibly fast. It's mostly recommended to use some sort of herbicide on Japanese knotweed. What I would recommend is if you have a site that is invaded with Japanese knotweed, you do kill it out. And this will probably take years to kill your whole patch out, but then you slowly start reintroducing other vegetation as you're killing out the Japanese knotweed. And then there's some things to look out for, like eastern red cedar. Eastern red cedar, it's one of our native evergreens. However, it's also the host of cedar apple rust and some of the pear rust. And so this can become a really a big problem on a lot of susceptible species of apples, not only leading to a foliar rust, but then also a fruit rust that pretty much will destroy the apple by the end of the growing season. So be looking out for cedar apple or for eastern red cedar on some of these lots. In some cases, if you're not going to be planting apples and pears, it can be okay. Or if you are going to be planting apples, make sure you're planting resistant varieties of apples. Cedar apple rust for us and pear rust becomes more of a problem as we get out into the more rural areas, because for us, that's where we have a lot more cedars. They're less in the urban inner city areas. So we do have more problems with rust on our kind of suburban rural sites that we work with, but that's not too many sites that we work with.
Hey, Matt, we do have a question about juglone. Do English walnuts also produce juglone, or is it just black walnut and butternut?
It is English walnuts as well. So if you have English walnuts in your orchard, or are planting English walnuts in your orchard, just realize that you will be limited as to some of the other edible crops that you can grow beneath them or within their root zone for that matter. So that does mean a lot of the rose family species. It also means a lot of the nightshades. So if you have a vegetable garden nearby, maybe you need to space your English walnuts a little bit further away. Same with the bean family. So the bean, a lot of things in the bean and pea family tend to really struggle with juglone toxicity.
And we have had some questions about mulching under the trees, cardboard, using cardboard under trees. If you are having a problem already, what are some things you can do to mitigate the weeds, at least underneath the tree? What are some
Yeah.
materials that you're recommending?
Yeah, so I wish that cardboard worked. I really, really do. Cardboard can buy you some time. So I was just over at a site earlier this week. Just last year, we made a really big effort to try to get the Bermuda grass under control within these tree ring areas. The Bermuda grass had kind of been let go for too many years in a row. So we ended up digging out Bermuda grass, but Bermuda grass roots can go fairly deep. They can go 12 inches deep easily. Then put down cardboard, then put down mulch. The problem is the wood chip mulch actually it becomes this nice little media for the Bermuda grass. The roots will just set right in there, and then it keeps growing through. So in some cases, almost having a clean space entirely beneath the tree would be better than having any sort of wood chips. So what this might look like is just black weed mat. However, there's a lot to be said why you should not do that. Because some of the problems with things like black weed mat is you're warming up the soil too quickly. Also, that weed mat doesn't allow for soil transpiration that easily. So I feel like there's not a good answer. I mean, it's sort of repeating year in and year out. You're always kind of battling that front line of the Bermuda as it gets into your mulch rings, and never letting it get to the point where that Bermuda has invaded all the way through beneath your tree. Now, I also will use on occasion along the perimeter, I will just use a line of herbicide. And this is when we have turfed areas that are absolutely thick Bermuda grass. And that will kill out that edge. This is the kind of thing where I don't like to recommend this. And there are certain times when I think it needs to be done. But Bermuda grass is one of those things where really it's helpful if you could get on top of it from the beginning before the site is planted, but that too is a challenge. So yeah, cardboard, wood chip mulch, placing coffee bags and wood chip mulch. But I think a lot of this is just constant vigilance. And anytime you see a new Bermuda shoot that's kind of gotten into that area, make sure you're pulling that back out. And during the height of growing season, this becomes a once a week activity. You're going through all of your trees and be like, oh, there's another shoot. I need to pull it out of the circle, and go through and do that. Now, there are some other tricks to try to weaken Bermuda grass. And so some of these would include starting a cool season grass that or some other cool season type of plant that can help outcompete Bermuda grass. So when I'm talking about cool season, I'm talking about clover. I'm talking about annual rye. In some cases, I'm also talking about perennial rye. So these are grasses that will thrive, or these are plants that will thrive during the fall, into winter, and into the early spring. Now, as these are growing, you let them grow a little bit taller in the spring. And as the Bermuda is trying to get established, Bermuda grass needs sun. It does not thrive in a shaded environment. So as the Bermuda grass is trying to get established, it's having a harder time because it's being shaded out by some of these cool season plants. This is one of the things that you can do to help weaken the Bermuda grass. But that does require being very active and sowing these things in the fall and letting them grow a little bit taller in the spring, so you're battling against the Bermuda. Yeah, I hate Bermuda grass. And the other problem is with the proliferation of contract lawn mowing, this gets spread from site to site to site so easily. You know, what used to be the neighbor kid just mowing the lawn, now it's a lawn company that goes across 3 different counties, and so you're just spreading all of these noxious weeds into every lawn anymore. So anyhow, lastly, there's a sort of root competition from the nearby woodlot, and this is a real thing. I've for years there's this site that we've worked with, and I told them as we were planning out the orchard that, well, this all of this tree line is going to be a problem. It is going to continually suck the resources from these rows of trees, and it did. It did. There was a lot less growth on the trees that were closest to that wood line. So it, these root systems do not always cooperate with one another. There's not a symbiosis that is necessarily happening with these root systems. In most cases, the root systems of the bigger trees are going to suck the resources away from the smaller trees. So beware of that when you are planting near a wooded mature area. All right, a little bit about the human infrastructure here. So what do I mean by that? Well, hey, we're a part of this biodiverse orchard. So what does this mean? So when we're looking at a site, let's look at some of the attributes of that site, because they're not all going to be these empty lots. Some of them have different attributes. So, sidewalks and pathways. If there are already sidewalks and pathways there, well, let's think about what we can do to make those more friendly on a human scale. So let's add trees along those sidewalks and pathways. Those trees will help mitigate the urban heat island as people are walking through. What are the utilities that may interfere? Before planting, we always make sure, and most of the time we're working with the site steward, and they have called 811 or DigSafe to mark any of those utilities. In some cases, there might be some utilities that aren't public utilities, but are things that were put in by the property owner, things like irrigation systems. So that's something that we need to be cognizant of. What sight lines and features should remain unobstructed? This is always huge as you're planning out a site, especially sites near intersections. Make sure as people are approaching that intersection that there's not plant material that is going to obstruct their view, that's going to make them eke out into that intersection that much more and cause some sort of accident? Are there murals on that site, on the side of a building? Um, you probably don't want to obstruct a nice mural that somebody has worked on. So, and then is there just kind of signage or directionals at your site? Just make sure that you're not obstructing any of those things. Also, think about the plant's need for water, and also who provides that water. That's going to be us. And so thinking about where that water source uh, is is absolutely necessary. On a 90-degree day in full sun, you don't want to be stringing 500 feet of hose to water trees. So make sure that a lot of your trees are placed within a reasonable distance of your water source. And then, this is also true of garden sheds and seating areas. As you're planning out a site, think about garden sheds. That's probably one of the biggest hindrances, I would say, to many of our sites, is they don't have a place that they can store their tools on site. So what that means is they're driving over to their site, they're walking over to their site, and they're having to bring the tools with them. After, a few times of doing that, that becomes very unsustainable. So think about these things as you are planning that site out. Also think about the turf. There are many sites that may just be planted and have some pathways between the plantings, but then there are a lot of sites where the site is so large that there is a lot of turf that is there. So think about who's managing that turf, what their goals are for that turf, and also realizing that you're trying to grow trees in that area too. And in the perfect world, the person managing the turf or the grass is also somebody that is working closely with the orchard. But in other cases, that is not the case. And so this means that the trees may have to be spaced further away to accommodate lawn mowing. The trees may have to be limbed up, pruned up, so the lawnmowers can get underneath them, et cetera, et cetera. And then sort of lastly, is there irrigation on the site? And what does that irrigation look like? There are many sites that we work with that we start having that conversation because we know the site is irrigated. It has spray irrigation on the turf. And as we start working with them, they no longer want to have the orchard in that area because it means they need to retrofit their irrigation system. So fruit trees and spray irrigation don't get along too well. Spray irrigation gets into the canopy of the tree. It causes fruit rot. It causes a lot of foliar problems. And so that can be kind of a non-starter for wanting to grow fruit trees, is having that spray irrigation. The other thing about irrigation is oftentimes the sites that are managing that irrigation, they're doing so incorrectly. They're watering too much. And that watering too much is also a reason that a lot of fruit trees die. Most fruit trees, they're incredibly drought tolerant, but they are very water sensitive. And so if you have waterlogged soils, it's very easy for those trees to develop root rot, and then they'll die. So if there is irrigation on site, that irrigation needs to be adjusted in order to accommodate the fruit trees.
Matt, we do have a question related to the previous topic of existing ground cover and vegetation.
Yeah.
So around the trees, what would be considered too close for root competition? 100 feet, 100 meters. Fred said drip line is how to view it, but can you explain what drip line is and the
Okay,
area?
so this would be kind of on the last bullet point here, the route competition from nearby woodlot.
Yes.
Yeah, so in general, drip line is helpful for explaining that, and what drip line is basically the canopy spread going all the way down to the ground of that woodlot of those larger trees. However, with most species of trees, their root system goes much further out into the soil than does the drip line. I think the thing to consider here is as you plant closer to that wood line or the larger trees, the shade trees, realize those trees that are closer are going to need more water in order to grow. So it's not to say you cannot grow them, just realize that you'll need to be giving those trees more resources because the larger the shade trees, the wood line, the woodlot, that is actively already colonized that area. So just as you get closer, so let's say you have a we'll call it a hedge of pin oaks that are 60 feet tall, and they probably have about a 60-foot spread. The roots on those are going to come out probably 50 to 60 feet from the trunk, so about 30 feet beyond the actual drip line. But it just means that you'll have to provide extra resources to those trees that are closer to all the competition.
Thank you.
Hopefully that answered the question there. All right, so as we're going through all of these steps here, then there's the soils and soil testing. And this is we've walked a lot, we've looked at all of these things. So what does soil testing do? Well, soil testing kind of helps give us a baseline on what we have out there. The pH, sometimes nitrogen, sometimes not. Phosphorus, as you can see, just looking at this soil test, and this is sort of a truism for a lot of Kansas City here. Our phosphorus turns out to be incredibly low. Most of the time, our potassium is sort of off the charts, and our pH is always a little high. And with a lot of our sites, our organic material is low. So what this tells us is there are some things that we can do to help this site. We can add a little bit of soil sulfur if we need to bring the pH down some. We can add bone meal or phosphorus to help bring that phosphorus level more into the medium range. We're fine on potassium, we're fine on calcium, but it looks like we need a lot of organic material. And so we can bring in compost to that site to add organic material. So having some of these baselines is very helpful, especially if you're looking at the site and you see there's very little plant growth to begin with. Or in some cases, it may just be a newly scraped, sort of new construction type site. But if you've not worked with the site before, getting some of these baselines can be very important, and then you could make those next steps. Then there's soil and soil structure, and so this is kind of par for the course. We have We have a lot of sites that they have been something else at some point in time. Uh, so there's this top photo. It's a 2011 image of this particular site. It's actually a site we're going to be planting later this fall. But as you can see, okay, well, that's a lot of gravel down there. That's a lot of parking lot. And this top 2011 photo doesn't even show the worst extent of some of this site. So basically, we could take this site as it used to be. Um, Basically, it used to be a parking lot, and it's been many things over the years. So this site, what we are planning to do, and as you can see from the current 2024 image, well, there is stuff that's growing there. There is green, there is vegetation. However, it's very it's poorly rooted. There are perennial grasses in there, but it's very thin and patchy. And so prior to us planting this site this coming fall, we are going to subsoil in this area. We will take our tractor down there, and with the subsoiler, read that as being a soil knife, we're going to rip 2 feet down that will help decompact in the rows where we are planting these trees. Then we will add compost within those rows, so that compost has a way to work down into the soil, and then we'll plant the trees on top of that, or within that newly amended and newly ripped soil. So that will help with drainage, that will help with organic material, and that will then help thusly with plant growth. Now, some other things to think about here too, it's sure it's the soil structure, but also the site history. And as I mentioned from the beginning, and we even had the question on this, yeah, that site history could be very convoluted, and it may mean the difference between planting and not planting on that particular site. So for us, it's not uncommon to run into a lot of rubble, urbanite, and if you're not familiar with the term urbanite, that's it's sort of a catch-all term for different human-made items of debris that you will find at any one of these planting sites. So this could be old chunks of concrete, pieces of pipe, glass, etc. I've got a good collection of bricks from various places now, all from just unearthing this stuff around the city. So that is the definition of urbanite. But the other thing that could be problems are potential toxins in the soil. And this is something that we shouldn't take too lightly, obviously. A lot of our older housing stock had lead paint on it. And so a lot of these places where the houses were removed, there could still potentially be lead in that soil. Now, the good thing about this, if there is a good thing, is that fruit plants do not pull up lead. So with the exception of raspberries, actually, raspberries, if planted in a lead contaminated site, they will pull up lead. But in general, fruit plants do not. Now, the act of digging in that soil, it does make the lead more bioavailable, meaning that the dust can be inhaled by you. It can be inhaled by a child that is playing in that soil. So that's something to definitely take into consideration. If you're planting with a group of people, make sure that you're probably not planting with children, or in the least minimizing their contact with that soil. Now, then there's some other things that, we kind of need to take into account, and some of these happen, and but it can be incredibly sporadic. We have worked with a site that has, and some of you may be familiar with PERC. It's short for perchloroethene. It is a dry cleaning. It's a chemical used in dry cleaning. Very toxic. It can get into the water systems. It can stay in the soil for a long time. And it's mostly, what's that? Oh, it's mostly absorbed through breathing. So if your site has historically been near a dry cleaning facility, you may want to have some soil tests done, and especially one of the EPA soil tests done. Now, things like chromium, that too can be an issue. For the most part, fruit trees are not pulling up chromium, however. So these are something we need to take into account. Like I say, some sites are going to be more polluted than others. So understanding a little bit more about your site history will be very helpful. All right, some other challenges. And we have these challenges, especially at the urban, kind of that urban woodland wildland interface. And this is wildlife. And mostly when I'm thinking about wildlife, I'm thinking about deer, because deer can really ruin your orchard and ruin it very quickly. We have a lot of orchards that they abut parks or wooded areas, and almost with every one of those, there is deer damage, and we have to mitigate that deer damage by doing something, be it putting up cages around the whole tree itself, or by putting some sort of metal trunk guard or sleeve around that trunk to keep the deer from rubbing on those trunks. So, a little bit about some of these. Squirrels, of course, are a major problem, and we hear about that everywhere. And people are always commenting, well, how are you going to keep the squirrels from getting the harvest? Well, certainly. And especially in heavily treed areas, those squirrels, they already have the oaks there nearby, so they're going to go from the oaks to the apples pretty quickly, and then off to the peaches. So locating your trees in the most open area as possible is going to help with that, because squirrels are less likely to travel across a field to get into a fruit tree. But squirrels, you can also kind of trick by putting barriers and baffles on the trunks of trees so they cannot climb up into the trees. Now, raccoons and possums, the same deal. And they're mostly going to be, close to the wooded areas too. So the closer your orchard is to a wooded area, you're going to have that problem. Rabbits, that's no big deal. Beavers, yes, can definitely be an issue. Groundhogs, a little bit of an issue. Voles for sure are an issue, especially on that urban wildland interface there. But for us, it has been deer. Deer have been the main issue, and in some cases, after we've consulted on an orchard in a more rural area and talked with these folks about what they would need to do to mitigate that deer pressure, they've decided that it's probably not worth planting an orchard because they would have to sink a lot of money into a fence and other deer deterrent measures. All right, so let's get a little bit into the design part, because now we've kind of talked about the lot and the site, and so now let's get into design, and let's talk about plant spacing a little bit. And plant spacing, these are recommendations, and realize that most of these recommendations are based kind of on your standard city lot that is also has some sort of grassy ground cover beneath it. So most of these are plants that are going to be sort of spaced in grid-like patterns. Now, if you have mulched beds, more of a free-flowing landscape, you can certainly play with the distances and the spacing on these. But like I say, these are general recommendations, and these are based on what the width of most of these plants are. So when you look at something like a semi-dwarf apple, a semi-dwarf apple is going to get about 14 to 15 feet wide. And so therefore, having that 15 to 18 foot spread means that it can be ultimately canopy to canopy, or you'll have a little bit of space between canopy. Same with the Asian pears, on and on. Notice that peaches and apricots are going to get a little bit wider. Peaches especially get wider. And then as you go down the line, you start to see things like pecan, and you see things like chestnut. And those are going to be the really wide growing. And so you will want to give them more space. And then here is just a little bit more. And these are all some of the smaller fruit plants. This is not all inclusive, obviously. But as we get into some of these shrubby growing fruits, obviously the spacing it decreases a little bit, and all of these are great plants to be putting in either a raised bed situation or in a mulched bed situation where you're just spacing them at the 4 to 6 foot on center, and you have them entirely within a mulched bed situation. When you're selecting cultivars for a site, and that's, this cultivars, we have a great recommended list for Zone 6 and Kansas City and kind of the Midwest, but a lot of cultivars are going to be very much based on regional adaptability as well. If any of you guys are wanting the list for the Zone 6 Midwest Kansas City area, we'll be glad to provide that at the end of this. But really, when selecting cultivars, the first thing that we're looking at is disease pressure. And so if the cultivar that you are planting is going to have a lot of disease and or insect pressure, well, you may want to reevaluate that. So the analogy I always use here is Honeycrisp apple. Honeycrisp apple grows horribly in Kansas City. It has a lot of nutrient deficiencies. It may have apple scab immunity. However, it also has a lot of susceptibility to cedar apple rust, and it has all of these other nutrient deficiencies that show up because of our clay soils and because of our high temperatures. So it's off the table for us. Other parts of the country, it may be a better apple. But so making sure you have good disease resistance on a lot of these selections is paramount. Of course, there's the regional adaptability. Ripening dates can be very important, and that's for you as a steward or for the stewardship group that you're working with. Nobody wants to have 20 trees ripening at the same time. or maybe they do. Maybe they just want to plan for that 2 weeks where everything is getting harvested, and then they're not having to worry about it, and they have 4,000 pounds of fruit that they then have to process or distribute. But most of the time, it's nice to have staggered harvests where you're getting harvests from June all the way into mid to late October. Growth habit, growth habit, that will be dictated a little bit by the size of the site. But also it may be dictated by whom you're working with. If you're working with an older clientele at a senior activity center, for example, well, having plants that are maybe going to be a little bit shorter, so nobody has to get on a ladder, might be better. And then the other thing about growth habit, it's not only size, but it's also the growth rate. And so realizing that some plants are going to grow much faster than others, that will dictate what you may decide to plant successionally afterwards. Peaches are going to come to maturity in about 5 years. And when I say maturity, they're going to be 20 feet tall by 20 feet wide in 5 years. However, an apple will not get that large in 5 years. The apple tree may be only a 10 by 10 in that 5 years. Another thing is soil tolerance. So for us, we don't grow a lot of blueberries because our pH is too high. There are just too many inputs that we have to put into that. So others of you may have naturally low pH, so blueberries are going to grow great. And then there's what the site stewards want to grow. So a lot of people have ideas about what they would like to see in the orchard, and okay, maybe they want Asian pears, but they want 10 peaches. And then there's the reality of what it takes to grow 10 peaches and all of the maintenance that needs to happen with those 10 peaches. So that's understanding what you want to grow is not what you may have the capacity to grow. And a lot of that depends upon the maintenance that those particular plants will take to grow. And then there's kind of the final design, and this is the as planted, and this was actually, if you remember the first slide, we sort of had the blank slate on that, and this is a final planted design here. It accommodates the slope, which was very severe, about a 30 to 35% slope going down, and then it levels out right as those trees get started there, and it becomes a more gentle slope. But then as you go slowly down into the bottom area, there are pecans, and those pecans are there to help absorb some of the water as it flows into, there's actually a landscape drain down a little bit further. The pecans are also there to help provide some shade along the sidewalk, as that sidewalk, as people start to use that sidewalk from the parking lot up to the apartment building. So the final design took into account the slope of the land. It took into account the water source, which you're not seeing on this site, and also took into account the traffic flow of this site and a little bit of the maintenance that the site would be able to tend to. There are no peaches at this site because peaches are that much more maintenance. And most of these plants are relatively, as far as fruit crops go, lower maintenance fruit crops. All right, another thing to consider as we're planting or as we're planning our site, is planting for insects. And here is more of the biodiversity right here. So, oh, many of you might be familiar with insectary gardens or nonetheless pollinator gardens. So the difference in terminology there is insectary gardens are actually bringing in more than just pollinators. They're bringing in a little bit of everybody. So these plants, they serve as nectar sources. So they're bringing in wasps, bees, bee flies, butterflies, lots of beneficial insects, but also because almost every insect nectars on something. It's getting sugar off of something. It will also bring in some pest insects. So this is like a big buffet. This is a sugar buffet that brings in all of these insects. It just so happens to bring in a lot more of the beneficials through the wasps and especially the bee flies and some of the braconid and tachnid flies that are those great paralyzing and parasitizing flies. So this is this open bar that brings all of these insects in, and then the beneficial insect sees the host species and says, oh, hey, you look tasty to me. I need some protein. I got all this sugar, but I need to raise my young on something. And so all of a sudden it decides it's going to lay eggs in this other species. So that is the whole philosophy behind these native plant insectary gardens. And the other big thing about this is the native plant aspect. So by using locally native wildflowers, grasses, and woody plants, you're helping foster a lot of the native insect biodiversity. So many of these species, some of them have become highly specialized on some of these native plants. Some of them just have a good symbiotic relationship with. You think of a lot of our lepidopteran species. A lot of our lepidopteran species, they host in their caterpillar stage on a number of different aster species, on a number of different pea and bean species that are native. So these are important for that whole little biodiversity link there. The other thing that this also brings in is it brings in a lot of our songbirds. Songbirds, what do they also do? Well, they eat a lot of caterpillars. So sometimes they're eating these native caterpillars. Sometimes they're also eating some of the fruit caterpillars that we see, like oblique-banded leaf roller. They'll be pecking around the undersides of branches looking for codling moth larvae. So the more we bring in some of these songbirds, the more these songbirds can also serve as pest eaters. So another thing for some more considerations for planting for insects is considering the flowering time. When we plant these insectary gardens, and we don't do too many of them with our sites, but we do a few, we always want to consider the flowering time. In order for these insectary gardens to be most effective, they need to be flowering really from the beginning of spring, and for us, that's mid to late March, until definitely late October, sometimes even late November. And there needs to be that nectar source there. Those sugars help wake those insects up, and then they come back, and then they will start to have successive generations near that insectary garden. The other thing we also want to consider with these is our proximity to the orchard and orchard plantings. The thing is about these orchard plantings, most of the time you will probably need to do some sort of spraying on your trees. And even though you may be spraying an organic insecticide, that organic insecticide is probably non-selective and can harm some of the pollinators, some of the beneficial insects that you are trying to get started. So when you're planting these things, make sure you are not in close proximity. Really, one of the best things you could do is locate your insectary planting to the south of your orchard. You think of the predominant wind, and during the growing season, it's coming from the south and it's blowing to the north. So if you have all of your flower display or insectary garden to the south, it's not going to get any overspray. Some other things to consider are keeping some bare soil in this garden. Bare soil, you absolutely need bare soil so some of these species can nest that are ground nesting species. They have access to that bare soil. And then maintaining some dead stems for species to nest in. And what this looks like are some of these stems that are about 1/8 to 3/8 inches wide, leaving them stand at about 2.5 to 3 feet, cutting them down in late summer to early fall to that 3.5 feet, letting them stand throughout the winter and into that next gardening season. That way you are getting that population of, in some cases, it might be mason bees. In some cases, it might be another one of our native bees that will then continue the generations the next year. And here's our recommended plant list for and this can go for most of Eastern North America because most of these plants are native throughout the range to Eastern Kansas. But this is our recommended list. And notice on the chart we have the flower color and sort of the range of months when it does flower. Like I said earlier, we like to have something that's flowering all the way from March into very much early November, if not even late November. And then with a little planning and time, you know, what used to be an empty lot can get transformed into something that is very biodiverse, not only in plant species, but also for humans and a very productive and usable space. So with that, if there are any other questions, because I know this is a kind of a big topic, and there's definitely more to talk about with this topic, but yeah, I'd love to entertain your questions. Hello?
Yeah, and feel free to unmute and ask questions if you have any. They can be specific about your orchard as well. Everyone's absorbing the information, Matt.
Okay.
Rajesh, did you have a question? I saw you pop on.
I do. If I'm having a specific pest management issue, where there is noticeable damage to the leaves of specifically one of the pear trees that we have, is there a way, I would love to see if it could be diagnosed just based on a picture. Is that something that I could send in to somebody, in terms of how I should go forward in terms of treating the affected area?
Yeah, I think that's you know, our field guide that we have on the website is somewhat, yeah, okay, yeah. Ashley just linked to it real quick. I think that can be helpful.
Okay.
I think another thing, um, you know, it's there because there can be a lot of different foliar problems. But yeah, I mean, this could be passed on. You could certainly send it to me. Uh, Another thing, and sometimes this could almost be considered cheating a little bit, if you will. But it, Google Lens is getting pretty darn good at actually you take a picture of that and it you know, I'd say 50% of the time you're maybe being led astray. But sometimes you can actually get a if you can't find something through the field guide, Google Lens, and then yeah, you could also send me a picture. Could you describe it really quickly? Oh,
Oh, I'm sorry. It's right outside the door here. I might be better off just sending you a picture. And I know that question may have been a little bit off topic from what was just discussed, but um, no, I would love to figure out what I can do better in terms of, yeah, figuring out what's affecting this tree.
yeah, and also you know sometimes a leaf spot may not be you know it may not be serious there because there can be a lot of spotting that does happen and it depends on you know sort of what percentage of the overall canopy has that same leaf spot. Is it affecting the growth of the tree? um, because there are a lot of things where the tree can just outgrow this. So the leaf spot could be cosmetic, or the leaf spot could be a symptom of something that is even worse. So yeah, yeah, certainly. And pears are especially kind of boogery about that too, because there are a number of different things that can cause problems there.
Matt, we do have a question from Rachel. What tree species do you recommend for folks who are just starting out or learning how to maintain fruit trees, maybe lower maintenance or less finicky?
Yeah, I mean, less finicky. I do think that persimmons are really they're not that finicky at all. You know, there will be certain things like webworm and leaf miner and some things that get in there, but you know, as far as the finicky aspect, not so much. Jujubes are also incredibly easy to grow. They are hardly any pest pressure, and they you know they're they're really drought tolerant. You could almost be guaranteed a crop every year. We recommend a lot of European and Asian pears. You know, I think the challenge that comes in with the European and Asian pears is what you know, kind of what Rajesh was having his problem with just different leaf spotting and understanding the you know what the leaf spot is it causing a problem or not. Pawpaws can be pretty easy. Pawpaws you just have to be very patient with, but they're super easy, and the nice thing there is you bring in or at least it's a host plant of the zebra swallowtail butterfly, so you're creating a habitat there. So I think they're a nice one. And tart cherries are super easy. As opposed to sweet cherries, tart cherries, I would say they're a no-brainer. You just have to be prepared to pick a lot of cherries and process them.
Yeah, and Rachel's located in Indiana, so close to Unity Gardens, and Katie Lane would be a contact for her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a quick question. So I'm in North Carolina, and I didn't know if you know, I've looked at your recommended cultivars and species, and I'm just getting into this work, so I know some of them grow well here and some of them don't. Are you all planning on sort of creating more recommended cultivars for different areas in the country? Yes, I see heads nodding. That's great.
Yeah, so yeah, part of the plan is as more affiliates join on, they will have their recommended plant list. I think, some of the things can translate fairly well as far as to North Carolina from Kansas City, because we do have a lot of zones. So, I mean, basically, our plant suite is kind of a zone 4 to zone 7, as such. And some of the things, I mean, you're probably more humid than we are, depending on where you are in North Carolina, but we still have the humidity. So the disease pressure is probably going to be, that much more of an issue. With our recommended list, and this, started with apples, but then carried through to pears and Asian pears and then on into peaches, was finding sort of what the key diseases were, and making sure that there was either immunity or good resistance too. So with the apples, it's a lot of the PRI apples that have been introduced over the years, and also doing some research on some of these older varieties that don't have the problems with, like, let's say, cedar apple rust. They may have some susceptibility to scab, but you can spray your way out of scab a little bit easier than you can, let's say, cedar apple rust. But yeah, that said, we are leaning on other affiliates to work with them on, hey, what's your recommended, top picks for apple, for pear, for peach, for persimmon, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, Abby?
Hey, so just in kind of broad strokes, from, planning to picking, we'll say, what is the time frame? Just like, I'm thinking, okay, I work at a university and we have a community garden, and so we'd like to, make an orchard available to our students as like a service learning opportunity. I have at least one colleague who's also on this on this call. Hi, Maite. And so if I am looking at a spot on campus and I think I want an orchard here, from the planning process to eventually having mature, not just having it planted, but also having the first mature harvest, how long is that time frame?
Yeah, so let's go from the planting rather than the planning, because the planning, that could get tied up for years, but but let's, so really from planting to harvest, conservatively 5 years. And now that's not going to be full harvest, but that will be and also dependent upon species too. But I'm talking mostly Asian pears and some of the berries. Some berries you'll be able to get harvest the next year, but that really doesn't take into account sort of the fully mature and getting into the full swing of things. 5 to 7 years is really when you will be actively, like, rallying around the orchard and thinning the fruits, really making sure you're having to do the maintenance on the spray schedule to make sure the fruits are going to be not compromised by different pests. So 5 to 7 years. The first few years, the first 2 years, 2 to 3 years, we always recommend that people pinch the blossoms off of their trees, so they're getting roots and shoots and not fruits. but then after year 3, you know, some of the species, if they're rooted in, you could get a very meager harvest. But years 5 to 7, that's definitely you're in the throes of it a little bit more. So
Okay. That's very helpful. Thank you.
yeah, certainly.
Yeah, and Abby, you're in St. Charles, Missouri, is that right?
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, so if you reach out to us, we can connect you both to the Kansas City program and the St. Louis program to get some more specific advice.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for showing up today. I thought that was a great conversation, and we will be sending out some resources from the chats. We'll have the questions that were asked here in our resources, as well as some useful links and notes in the recording. So thank you, Matt, for that presentation. We really appreciate your time, and I hope everybody has a great afternoon.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.